If you've ever wondered what some of the most iconic bottles that there were ever released in the 1980s that went to Japan from American whiskey, today is the day where you're going to get to find out the true legends of American whiskey that left the US and went to Japan, because we have the man, the myth, and the legend, Mr. Dan Filipek. So,
Thank you,
Dan.
It's an intro to live up to.
Yeah, not a bad intro, right? But in all sincerity, I have, been on this whole kind of American whiskey quest for almost 15 years now. And one of the individuals that would come up here and there in certain circles when it came to, both knowledge and, having actually experienced and tasted some of the most legendary bottles that left the US and went to Japan in the 80s was you. I just want to say it's a real pleasure and it's an honor for us as Bourbon Lore to be with you here today. We're actually at Neat right now, so shout out to Owen. Thank you for having us here. Neat, if you haven't been, is, as you can see from behind us, we're here in the bottle shop. There's an amazing bar on the other side of this that we have had a chance to frequent off and on as Bourbon Lore that has some awesome dusty pours. And you can basically sip on anything your heart desires, from probably dating back even around Prohibition, right? So he's got some old stuff in there. And if you feel up to it and you want to start working on your Bourbon Lore collection, great news is you have a few opportunities to be able to pick some up here as well and take home with you. So thank you, Owen, and thank you, Neat, for having us. Dan, if you wouldn't mind, we're here because of you, my friend. So we share a little bit about your background and how did you find yourself into the position where you have become the Dusty Butler.
Yeah, how did Dan become Dan?
Wow. Well, over a period of many years, I would say. I grew up working in restaurants from a young age. I was probably 13 or so. And I guess I worked my way up from, washing dishes and pouring coffee at a diner. And then I was a bar back. And then I was, a manager, and then I was a sommelier. And I guess for most of my career, I was selling wine, mostly in New York. So I had a wine background. I always loved wine. I loved, I loved the iconic producers, the ones that were just hyper committed to quality, and that really showcased their terroir, their region. And then where did whiskey come in?
Yeah.
Whiskey came in around 2014. My daughter was just born, and we had gone, my wife's Japanese, and we had gone with our daughter to see her family. And, our daughter's only a few months old, and we get there and it's kind of culture shock.
So where'd you land? Where'd you go?
Osaka. And I was consulting for this restaurant group at the time. And they heard that I was going to Japan, and they say, oh, well, look for whiskey while you're, bring us whiskey back. I'm like, what are you talking about?
Huh.
And so I got there. My wife takes me to this old district that she used to work in. It's called Kitashinchi. And it's pretty central Osaka. It's sort of like the Ginza of Osaka. Ginza in Tokyo is like nightlife district, Fifth Avenue, if you will. Anyhow, I wandered into this shop, and there were just two bottles of, there was a bottle of Handy Sazerac Rye, and there was a bottle of Eagle Rare 17, and they were both old at that point, like 2006 or so. So they had been sitting there. Yeah. They've been sitting there for a while. I go, okay, these look like something I should grab, and I picked them up, and then
What'd you pick those up for in 2014?
It was like 26,000 yen per each. So that would have been about $200.
Wow.
Per
Fair shake.
bottle.
Okay.
And then, and then I posted some pictures, and then my inbox starts blowing up, and people are like, will you take $600 for the Handy? I'm like, what?
Wow.
What? And I'm like, wow. And then, so then I started finding bottles, and it was really just to pay for the airfare originally, because we were both still working in restaurants. And I thought, well, I got to find a way to pay for the airfare. And then, we would go twice a year. It became a hobby.
Right.
And the hunt, I always loved the hunt.
Yeah.
And I found different shops in the area, and I would never negotiate prices with them. I would just say, okay, thank you so much.
Yeah.
And then to them, they were, oh my God, what is this?
Yeah.
Because most of the foreigners that come, most of them are Chinese, and they're looking for Japanese whiskey, and they want to pay 50 cents on the dollar to what. So to have an American 10 years ago in Osaka, just buying whatever they were asking, they probably never seen it before. So I got shops to start holding stuff for me, and then I would go visit them, and Denny, you are back.
Okay, so repeat customer.
Right. Yeah, I developed relationships, and I told them what I was looking for, and I sort of always targeted the best juice in the best condition, and I gravitated towards higher proof because that's what would last in the bottle over 20 years. A lot of the 90 proof and 86 proofs, sitting in Japan for 20, 30 years, they're cooked.
Yeah.
So those original bottles that you bought, those were things that we could get in the States, but then you're at a certain point you started looking for things that are Japan exclusive or exports. How did you develop that specialty of knowing what to look for that was unique to Japan?
Well, and the bottles always look different. Well, first of all, most of them were wax tops, right? So, Hirsch gets the most credit within American whiskey for making a bottle of bourbon look like a fine bottle of cognac. But they weren't the first one to put wax on the bottles. That started in the 80s with Marcy and Saint Nick and all her labels.
And Marcy, just for a moment, and talk about what she was doing in the 80s. So those that don't know, that might want to be in the know, it's like a fan and a collector that's like, wait a minute, I haven't really kind of ventured outside of the U.S. What are these bottles that left the U.S. in the 80s, and who are some of these individuals like Marcy that were doing something unique at that point in time? So who's Marcy?
So she is the woman who essentially built out the market for American whiskey in Japan. And she started selling the Van Winkle and the Willett family's whiskeys in Japan. And as part of her agreement to sell those brands, she developed her own brands in addition to the Van Winkle and Willett family's brands, using their juice. The other thing is no one was doing barrel proof then. No one was doing barrel proof whiskey. I mean, here and there, but if you look at whiskey before the 1980s, barrel proof is so rare. I mean, that's like, Brown Foreman did it for this restaurant who they had a relationship with for 50 years, and Stitzelweller did it for a hockey team. And that's kind of it. You don't really see a lot of true barrel proof, 100 proof.
Yeah, whether it's National Distillers or Austin Nichols, everybody kind of found whatever they were proofing down to and had a certain proof that they liked to be able to release at.
Right.
But that was the case in Japan, or could be the case.
Yeah, so in the 80s, that was the beginning of the glut. We call it the glut era. That's when American whiskey sat in the barrel too long. Prior to the 80s, 12 years was old. That was an old bourbon. So they were in the late 80s, the early glut, they were lying about the age being younger than it was.
Right, so you just couldn't say it was older, but you could say it was younger.
So you saw a lot of 12-year age statements where the average, the average age in the bottle could have been 15, 16, 18. But they always just seemed special to me. And I never saw that many of them, like the very old Saint Nick's.
So were those were the ones you gravitated toward?
Well, first was the Van Winkle. First was all these old Van Winkle and Hirsch bottles, and I never saw them in the U.S. They were only in Japan, and I thought, these are not that much more expensive than current Van Winkle 23-year, or this price differential. It just can't last.
What was it like to look for those? I mean, I think for a lot of people, they don't know what it's like to look for whiskey in Japan, but were you going from liquor store to liquor store to liquor store, or was it fairly easy to find stuff? Or was it relationships that you had to build?
Relationships, started out going store to store, but you don't find that much that way. And what I think the reality is I think, even 10 years ago, the inventory was consolidated, meaning like one or two entities have a giant warehouse, and they were peeling off piece by piece.
Huh. Okay.
It wasn't till COVID hit, and Japan closed the border, and meaning they didn't allow anyone to enter.
Okay. What happened then? How did that change?
Well, a lot of bottles hit the market that I hadn't seen in the previous 6 or 7 years.
Oh, okay.
So it seemed like people, were scared of what the pandemic would do to their economy.
Okay, so
they cashed in.
I see. Yeah.
So I was lucky, and and just every
The dusty bunker grew.
Yeah.
every waking moment,
Reshuffling.
I'm asking my wife, all right, this person's selling this, contact them, tell them we'll buy that, and ask them what else they have. And just say, whatever else they have. And that's how we got most of it, actually.
Okay. So what do you recommend? Let's say someone is going to Japan now.
Yeah, you won't find anything.
Well, I mean, okay. So, but are there?
You can go to
certain
bars. I mean,
so bars.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, there's Gamore,
Yeah.
which is
of course.
It's like a museum.
Yeah.
And then there's Rogan's Tavern, which is in Osaka, also like a museum. There's Ken's Bar in Tokyo. So there's a few bars that you can go to, and then the pricing's fairly reasonable. But in terms of finding old bottles there now, it's gotten really tough.
Wow.
It's gotten very tough.
So part of our aspiration as Bourbon Lore is we want to be able to share in the story and the history of what American whiskey, where it's been, where it is, and then in return to kind of maybe help understand where it's evolving and where it's growing to. But the other piece is in the lore, right? And yeah, exactly, my favorite part. But when you think about the lore, we are essentially wanting to do our part in being able to understand what are those certain expressions, those certain bottles that meant something and today now stand as the lore and are acting almost as a character in the story of American whiskey that defined the journey that American whiskey has been on. One of those, well, in fact, several of those bottles of lore are sitting here right now. And one of the bottles that you have actually brought up before we kicked this off that you poured a little of is in there. And if you wouldn't mind, let's experience it. This is a lore moment for me. So this is a first time I've ever had this, right? And we've talked about this. Clay and I've talked about it. Emerson and I've talked about it. This Legends of the Wild West is like, obviously, growing up in Arizona, and you know how I feel about the American West. But not only is this an iconic release when it comes to the branding and the overall kind of package associated with this, gold wax. Obviously, this is not something that stayed within the U.S., but why don't you share with us a little bit around what is this unique one of one?
So ironically, this is one of the labels Marcy's most embarrassed about.
Really?
Yeah, because she thinks it's so cheesy.
It's probably like,
I told her the cheese, a little bit of cheese is amazing.
It's the
Especially when
cheesy
the
gold
juice-
foil,
right?
cheesy gold foil.
It's in.
So I guess backing up, in the late 80s and the early 90s, Marcy was buying a lot of the best juice that no one wanted. The Stitzel sat too long, and no one wanted it. And so she went in and bought up a ton of Stitzel for almost nothing, and created kind of a plethora of brands, because there's a lot of different brands and labelings. A lot of them contain the same juice.
Yeah.
So this is one of them that she did, and she sold 12 packs, and there were 11 different characters in each of them. So there's like, what's this one? Davy Crockett. There's Daniel,
Kit Carson,
Geronimo, Daniel Boone, Lewis and Clark, all of those. And they're very cheesy. They're very, but in the 80s and 90s in Asia, they probably saw this and
Oh yeah.
wow.
I mean, that looks amazing.
Yeah. But the juice is phenomenal. And
Or the color.
I know.
So, but this was basically when you think about these legends of the West here, the Wild West, this was not something that she did for every year for 10 years.
No, it's a
This was a one-of-one, one-off. And this is where we get into, I think, when you think about like, well, where do you go to find this information? Like, where does this information exist? And it doesn't really. Like, I mean, it's very difficult to understand. But if you go back, there's some iconic distilleries with some incredible product where there was a few individuals that happened to be in the right place at the right time, and in return having the right access to create these unicorns, right? And that's the lore that. And when you open this, I mean, Clay, when you smelt this,
it's phenomenal. And to be
everybody back here right
to be
now, that's
willing
like
to do what was the proof again? It's
114.
114 at a time when no one was doing that.
No one.
You know, obviously export, but she's doing this 15-year-old 114 proof. I mean, no one else. And
yeah,
that
also
is-
unfiltered. You know,
Yeah.
unfiltered, undiluted.
I mean, that is pure bourbon.
yeah,
Right there. That is, and it's beautiful.
part of the collectability is the fact that I think it's beautiful that somebody had the foresight to see something and be a pioneer at that period within American whiskey. Second is this is something that is from most likely one of the most legendary distilleries that any of us could say has probably ever existed within American whiskey. And then on top of that, the freaking flavor profile, the nose, the aroma alone is filling this room.
Right.
And then to be able to actually experience that expression, like this is not something that I feel that when we sip on American whiskey today can necessarily be easily found or replicated. And that's what makes this, to me, the lore. And with such gratitude, I'll take a second pour. No, not yet. Not yet.
Yeah, this is one that people caught wind of years ago and drank it all up.
Oh.
Like even 10 years ago, I didn't see that many of these. The only way they came on the market was, you know, the 2 or 3 bars that were holding them sold them.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, there's really little left. I think maybe she did, you know, like a few thousand bottles.
Yeah, that's it.
So perhaps each character, there could only be a few hundred.
Yeah.
So yeah, very rare. But you know, the juice that's in here is, you know, it's in various Saint Nick's. It's in, I can't maybe, but various labels. So the juice is not so unique for that time period. You know, because she bought a ton of Stitzel. She said tankers of it that she had.
That's amazing.
A lot of Bernheim. Heaven Hill came later. But, you know, she was just always buying the best juice.
Tell us about, so very, very old St. Nick. That's kind of the, if anyone has heard of Marcy Palatella,
Right.
that's the first name that comes, the first brand that comes to mind. Tell us a little bit about that one, because that's
About
the
St. Nick?
Well, yeah, that's the icon, right?
Yeah.
Santa.
So there's a ton of St. Nick bottles.
Yeah.
You know, a ton, like
Right.
maybe over 80s to date, you know, there's probably 300 or something.
Yeah.
And it's unique and one of kind of, you know, individual variations.
Yeah,
of
right.
Santa.
So
Yeah.
every bottle was
Right,
a small
bourbons.
run.
Right.
You know, she started in the...
Should we show what a Saint Nick looks
Oh,
like?
sure.
Here?
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
Oh,
come on.
you go.
Let's
All
let the
right.
audience experience the Saint Nick. The crowd goes
This
wild.
is a
out
new
here. Well,
one.
this
This
might
is
be yours,
actually my
but-
barrel pick.
But that's
Oh,
the.
this is yours.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So the Dusty Bunker's first barrel pick was a 17-year Saint
Very
Nick.
cool.
So I was very
with
proud.
Yeah,
us.
show us because that's the original. That's the
Yeah,
look.
she drew that.
yeah.
So she started selling Christmas packaged Jim Beam products or whatnot in Japan,
Okay.
and they sold out. Right? They were sitting here. She took them there, and they sold out because the Japanese thought the packaging was awesome.
Okay.
So then she created Very Old Saint Nick as like a, you know, maybe it was a
very
holiday
old school
brand.
Santa.
Mhm.
Okay.
So she drew that, and the first big round of Saint Nick's that she did would have been in, you know, kind of between 88 and 91.
Okay.
And I hoarded them because the juice is amazing.
Yeah.
We know you hoarded them. I tried to
It's,
find them and nobody was having any. And then they'd be like, you got to talk to
Everyone said,
this
"Talk to
Dusty
Dan."
Bunker Dan. I'm like, this guy is like, you know, this legend, but I can never find him. I can't connect with him. Where is he?
Yeah, I bought them up because the Van Winkles were so expensive. You know,
Yeah.
and I'm like,
No, it makes sense.
for
I mean-
pennies on the dollar, I can hoard the Saint Nick's. Yeah, it was a long road. You know, the brand has really been, I don't want to say shat on, but sort of.
Well,
You know,
I mean, there's
People want to drink it. People
I mean,
have always
Pappy and Willett, they sort of hog the limelight, and
Definitely.
I mean,
so that's the
or
biggest.
people pay attention to those, but this is right there with them.
I
in
think
terms
so.
of the quality and the history and the legacy of what that whiskey actually is.
I mean, to put it in perspective, in the 80s and 90s, KBD bottled more of Marcy's brands than their own.
And share with the audience, what is KBD?
KBD is Willet when they were not distilling.
Yeah, right.
So from 76, well, they were closed from 77 till 83, 84. Nothing happened there. And then in the mid 80s, Evan Colsvin and Martha Willett took over management or whatnot, and they started bottling the barrels that they had left over from the 70s. So they were a non-distilling producer, as was the Van Winkle family from 92 onward. So the most famous run of Van Winkle bottles are bottles that were done at a non-distilling producer in Lawrenceburg, the old Commonwealth Distillery.
Julian. And the distinction of Marcy is that she had that access and knowledge about Japan, right? Is that
she built the market out.
Yeah.
A market creator.
Right.
Yeah.
And then Europe followed.
Right.
You know, because the Japanese economy was doing great from 88 to 92. That was
Yeah, what a time.
right.
Yeah.
A lot of these bottles were selling in Japan for significantly more than they were in the US.
That's amazing.
You know, like a bottle of Blanton's in Japan retail in the late 80s was 12,500 yen, which is over about $110.
Wow.
In the late 80s. And I don't think there was anything in the US that was $110.
No.
I don't think there was anything. And then even years later, in 99, you know, Martin Mills 24, that was the most expensive bourbon ever. And that was $275.
I would buy any Martin Mills for sure. It's Martin Mills, big fan in the Bourbon Lore family. We when we did our legendary launch party, we did the Bourbon Valley 24 in a lineup against the Martin Mills 24. An epic evening, another legendary moment that we'll never forget.
It was.
We're gonna have to think about what you're gonna bring to the next Bourbon Lore Legend experience, Dan. So share with us a little bit. I'm kind of curious, when you get excited about American whiskey today, and you think about kind of, you know, obviously Bourbon Lore is, you know, we're committed and invested in wanting to make sure that we do American whiskey justice with being able to share in the story and some of the legendary bottles that have been released that maybe haven't had the opportunity to really come to life and be told in the way that they, you know, deserve. But we also are wanting to create new, incredible expressions, whether in our collaborations with certain distilleries or in relationships with yourself. So this is something that you've sipped on a lot of whiskey, some amazing bourbon. What makes this unique and special to you?
The oak. I mean, the oak quality. You don't get a lot of mature oak in modern American whiskey. And this is something no one wants to talk about, but it's a reality, you know, is the fact that the American oak that was used to make barrels up until around, I don't know, 2000 or so, was from old growth trees, right? So these are trees that, you know, grew in a forest. They had to compete for resources. It took them time to grow.
Right.
And then, you know, they would harvest these trees, and they would be hundreds of years old. They would air dry for years before they cut slabs.
They're seasoned.
The grain density was very tight.
Of course.
In each of those grains. So, and this has affected everything. Wine, right? You know, in the past 30 years, how much less American oak is being used to age wine? A lot.
Yeah,
a lot less. You know, it's even in California. You know, oaky Chardonnays. Those are rare. Those are more scarce now. They're all stirring the lees for texture because the oak isn't there.
Yeah.
So it's much harder today to get this developed, mature oak quality.
Yeah.
Where, you know, you get the juicy tannins, you know, and the aroma. And I think that's why this Wild West, here, try it.
Okay, we've been patient. I've been patient. I appreciate it. Be happy to.
Oh, twist my arm. Sure. Thank you.
Oh.
Yeah, no, I mean,
Have you released this yet?
100% right. You know, once you smell something like this and you go, oh, I know exactly what you mean. The oak notes are fundamentally different.
Yeah, it just took time. It took a lot of time to make this.
Yeah.
You know, the barrels that were used.
I think your point about the tannins is absolutely on. Like, there are tannin notes that you get today out of younger trees, and it's very different. It's pointy.
Right.
It's not rich. It's not developed. This is tannic in a totally different way.
We need this.
Yeah, this really surprised me.
I think my backpack looks a lot like yours. You want to borrow mine for a day or two?
And then the other thing is the aging. You know, like where does the whiskey age? And this is huge. So Bardstown is optimal, and if you have a good warehouse in Bardstown, you're several steps ahead of everyone.
Yeah.
So she has a single story warehouse that gets optimal optimal airflow, and when you have this steady flow of air, you know, hitting the barrels on a constant basis, they get really extracted.
Yeah.
You're squeezing every drop of flavor out of that wood.
Yeah. You really taste that on this.
Lot number 1. Very old Saint Nick, notorious old Saint Nick.
And is this released yet? What's the story with this? This is your pick.
Yeah.
How come you haven't shared?
I still have a little bit. I sold it very quietly because I still have some, but I'm not.
No. All right.
But I've been offering it around, and mostly I want people to like it.
Yeah, well.
and I want people to
hard.
love it. I want people to love it rather, and so that's been my goal.
Dude, that's freaking beautiful.
It really is.
Very happy with this.
And what was that? 124?
Yeah, 124.8. It was actually one of the lowest proofs of the lot.
Is that
a lot
right?
of them were 130.
No kidding. For 17 year. Ah, that's nice.
But this is the
How many
one.
bottles did you net out of that?
120.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's phenomenal.
Thank you.
It really is.
Thank you.
All right, Dan. I want you to glance up here. Take a look here.
Yeah.
I know, obviously, we got multiple cameras going here, so they love it when we do this. We kind of go rogue and don't exactly stay in our seated position. But help enlighten us, right? Like there's some variations here. Obviously, we're big fans of the classic cask. But when you see, like, obviously we got Old Man Winter up here, right? We got a few very old St. Nick's. What kind of stands out?
We got some Cock of the Walk down there.
Oh yeah, right here.
Yeah.
Red Wax, 15-year.
So I guess what do I go after?
Yeah. What when you see this here?
I kind of target distilling period, right? So I'm really after things distilled in the 70s, the 80s too, but I feel like the juice that was distilled, between 74 and 81, that 5-year period for distilled dates. Though to me, those are the best of what went to Japan. It's hard to determine exactly what those are, but you can kind of guess.
Yeah. Okay.
So like these Saint Nick 94 proofs that are in the Bordeaux bottles, those are all within that period. And those were those were bottled all the way up until around 99, 2000. 2000 was kind of the last hoorah for Saint Nick.
2000. Okay.
Yeah, maybe a little bit later, but right around there.
Yeah.
That was like
sure.
the last run.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's actually right around the time that Diageo, was United Distillers, pulled the plug on supplying KBD.
Okay,
Hence Marcy couldn't. That would have been her supply as well.
Okay.
And then that was all the juice that went to Buffalo Trace.
Yeah. Okay.
They built out their antique collection with.
Right.
So all the old Stitzel, the old Bernheim, the old Shenley Rise.
Yeah. All of that. Right.
Yeah. And all the Saint Nick Rise are really good.
Yeah.
I think there are a couple different sources. and they're varying degrees of age and weight. You know, some of them seem to be around 9 to 12 years old. Some of them seem much older.
And during that classic period, was pretty much everything going to Japan, or did she?
Yeah,
keep
well,
some of it for the U.S.
I don't think there were many consumers in the U.S.
Yeah,
at
right.
that time.
Oh,
They went to Europe as well.
Is
So
that right?
the other
Okay.
markets would have been Europe. Yeah, the German market was huge. Not just for American whiskey, but you know, if you're tracking down like old malt, old Scottish whiskey,
Sure.
the German market, and in the Alps as well, Switzerland. Yeah, the other largest Saint Nick collector was in Zurich.
Ah,
You
okay.
know, and he had a massive American whiskey collection. He had all the ryes, like the Rathskiller and the. He sold those 10 years ago. So when his Saint Nick's came up, I had to grab them.
Good move.
Yeah, but yeah, it was Japan and Europe. Those were the markets.
Okay.
Share with the audience, like, are there 3 favorites that you've sipped on, that you've experienced, where you've had your own lore moment going, wow, what a freaking special bottle. Not just the St. Nick's, like, because we've got a few favorites that I think about, like that, from a release that, we had to, obviously find, and whether it was certain Hirsch's or certain Van Winkles that we had to, kind of find and bring back to the U.S. I'm just kind of curious, like, what stands out to you? What are those lore bottles that left the U.S. that are not just the St. Nick's, but a couple others you've had where you're like, I'll never forget this sip, this pour?
One of them, I guess, one that you wouldn't think of would be, and there's a few of them, but they're all done in these cubic bottles, and there's different labels on them. And they're the same cubic bottles that the Van Winkle 12-year 105 proofs went into.
Okay.
And they were done between 88 and 91. And a lot of them are, either Stitzel or something else that is weeded that is equally delicious. So examples of that's like Old Groms.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So there's an Old Groms 15-year that, I got
The
one.
leather label.
The leather label is, don't talk about that. No, the leather label is amazing. Yeah, that's in that realm as well. I always, any of the juice that's black. I mean, black or purple.
Yeah.
I've always
Motor oil.
Yeah.
I've always targeted. You hold it up to the light, and it's literally it's got
literally the
purple
juice
hues
itself.
to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I've always chased the like the juice that got really expensive, in other bottles. So like Society of Bourbon Connoisseurs.
Stop. Cut it off. We
those-
can't go there. We only have the 19 and 20.
But those were $6,000 in 2015. Right?
Yeah.
And there were not many bottles of American whiskey at that. But that's one of those bottles where it's just dark, inky.
Yeah.
So I was targeted that juice, but in a different bottle that was cheaper because I knew they were out there. So Groms is one of them, but that's hard to find.
Yeah.
Society
what
of Bourbon
else?
Connoisseurs might pop up every so often as well.
Yeah,
Especially the 20.
I pulled 13 in 10 years,
Wow.
Unbelievable.
and and I never passed on one.
Really?
So if I saw it, I bought it, and it was only 13. Yeah, and one guy bought half of them. But that funny story about that is one guy has probably consumed 35% of all the society bottles.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, he was
All right.
he was buying them
Through you've helped.
through me later. I was his last, but he got them through me through someone else before that. But yeah.
So thank you for joining us here today. I know that you were in Holland and then over in New York, and I just came here to Louisville. It's been a real pleasure. We appreciate your wisdom. Thank you for sharing. It's a big element of what Bourbon Lore is about, is also the community, right? The friendships, the people you get to meet, the knowledge, the wisdom that we are shared from friends like yourself and others that is extremely helpful, because not all of this is written down or easily accessible, or you can't just simply find it on the internet, right? It takes the folklore, the conversations, the gift of story. But for our fans right now, they're watching, thinking to themselves like, "Geez, like how do I? Let's hold this up here for a second. Let's close this out in the right way." So you hold this. Here, Clay. I think we have to have our fans, share with us, of these three, what would you love Dan to send you a sample of? And hit us up in the comments below, right? Like, comment, subscribe. We need all the love. Being able to bring the beautiful love of American whiskey to a broader audience. But take a look at these three. Dan's a great guy, and hit us up and let us know which of these three you would love a sample of from the Dusty Bunker, Mr. Dan Filipek. So cheers, Dan, to you. Cheers. Thank you for being here. Thanks for sharing these beauties. And cheers to the Bourbon Lore family.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you, brother.